It is my pleasure to introduce Chris Bird to you today. So Chris is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research, working on empirical software engineering as part of the Research in Software Engineering, the RISE group, or I think you're called Saint now, aren't you?
Yes.
Oh, you haven't updated your webpage.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the Saint group.
Good call.
And he received his PhD in computer science from UC Davis, where he studied empirical software engineering with Prem Devanbu. And actually, Prem Devanbu was the first author of a paper on fact or myth that we replicated earlier in the term. And I think you might have been a co-author on that as well.
Was this the belief and evidence stuff?
Yeah. Did you know
Yeah.
that we replicated that in the class?
No.
We
Oh,
did. Yeah.
I don't have time now, but I want to know the results. That sounds super interesting.
Yeah, we'll paste a link to the visualization we created that did a comparison with Microsoft developers and with
Okay.
students in the class on which beliefs or myths they believed or didn't. So yeah,
Sweet.
yeah. And then we had a good discussion on it. We'll share that with you. Anyway, back to today. So Chris is working on ways to use data to guide decisions of stakeholders in large software projects. And I also know that he works a lot on developer productivity and looking at the role of AI in software engineering. And Chris uses mixed methods a lot. You really have expertise in both. We're talking a lot in this course about using, mixed methods and the benefits and limitations of using the different methods. And I have had the pleasure to learn from Chris and work with him over the past few years. The class has already figured out that I've invited a lot of my friends as guests in this class. So you don't have to pretend we're not friends. The cat's already out of the bag on that one. And for today, we read your paper that you wrote together with Alberto Biccelli on code review. And we want to maybe ask you some questions and just have a chat about that paper. And I'll ask one just to kind of get us going here a little bit. What was it that kind of led you to do that study at the beginning? Like, what was kind of your pathway to that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And it's not the most inspiring answer. So I come from this area of research called mining software repositories. You've probably read papers in this area where the idea is that you're trying to gather a lot of data and then produce some insights so that you can help software teams kind of actionable questions like, is testing good, or are there good ways to assign people to tasks, or all kinds of statistical and things that you can do with this data. I got to Microsoft Research and I was like, I need to find some area that hasn't been tackled. And I was talking to a number of people exploring a lot of things and found out that code review was both this area that hadn't seen a lot of change or innovation for a long time. And in the paper, we make the claim that, like, look, it's still kind of the Stone Age. People just looking at text. There's not a lot of tools there. And at the same time, there was this tool that everybody across the whole company used to do code reviews, which is really unusual at a company the size of Microsoft, that there'd be one tool that people consistently use all over the place. So my kind of data mining brain was like, oh my gosh, I have to mine this data and figure it out. But I had learned previously that if you just grab a bunch of data and start doing experiments and things with it, without really understanding that data and like the processes that it describes, then you're going to get into trouble. So I was like, well, I want to do this deep dive on code review at Microsoft. It seems so interesting. No one has studied it, and we have a ton of data. And so I sent an email to Alberto, who's a graduate student at the time, and I said, hey, we have this data. Write me up a one-page summary of like all your ideas. What could we do with this? And so we used that. We kind of brainstormed, and we both decided the first thing we need to do is just kind of understand why people do code review at Microsoft, what they hope to get out of it, what the challenges are, all these things. And that really, I mean, that's the title of the paper, was just our exploration into it. And along the way, I found it super interesting. My wife calls me a total nerd. So, most people, I think, it would read the paper and their eyes would glaze over, but I found it just fascinating. And I love talking to people about how they work, and all kinds of people do this in a lot of different ways. So long answer, but that's kind of how I got into it. And then that spawned kind of 5 years of research into this area.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was great. I love it. And I still get people around the company asking me about that particular paper. So
Yeah. And actually, one of the things maybe that didn't come out really strong in the paper is the history of CodeFlow as a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a grassroots kind of thing, wasn't it? More than,
It was, yeah. So, and this is kind of born out of the fact that back in the day, and we're talking like pre-GitHub, so like Stone Age of software development, it feels like probably to you. People would literally look at diffs, right? They would do CVS diff and look over, and that's how they would do a code review. So, you're at the command line, literally, not even a web interface. And so some people at Microsoft, there were three guys that got together and was like, this is ridiculous. We have this Visual Studio IDE that does all this crazy stuff, but then when it's time to do code review, we just have no tooling at all. And so these three guys, just as grassroots, put together this tool and started using it in their own teams. But then at Microsoft, as people move around within the company, they kind of take with them kind of a knowledge and expertise, and tools that are homegrown tend to kind of spread in this viral grassroots way. And so within a matter of a year or two, almost every team at Microsoft was using this tool that they had written. And the funny thing was, it actually wasn't sponsored by anyone. That is, no one was paid to work on it. These three guys were just doing it on the side. That has changed, and the company saw the value of having a good, mature code review tool. And now there is a team that works on it. But for a long time, it was just them. But you're doing something right if a tool is used consistently across a huge company with tens of thousands of developers.
yeah,
And that tool has informed. I mean, people often ask me at conferences, are they going to make it available externally? And I don't think so, because it's so tied to how we work. But it definitely has informed the code review process or the code review tools that Microsoft is putting out. And now that GitHub is a part of Microsoft, it's informing kind of the direction that they're going with PRs and that type of thing. So there's just three people is like, a big win story of just, having an idea and doing something about it and
yeah.
affect people.
It's such a great success story, right? Of
Yeah.
a tool, of a developer tool. So we do have some other questions about tools and what you think about future tools. But before we get to that, we have a couple about automating code reviews, which you touch on a little bit in your paper. So I'll start with invite Jonathan Bezo.
In your paper, you describe how code reviews accomplish far more goals than merely finding defects or typos in the code. They provide awareness and transparency to other developers while forcing developers to learn and transfer knowledge about other parts of the system, arguably making them better developers for the system. Do you think that endeavors to automate the code review process are dangerous because they lose these hidden benefits of code review in favor of giving developers more time to build code?
That that's a really good question, because and so my answer to every good question is it kind of depends. um, and uh, and that's because I think there can be a danger. Like if you said we are going to get rid of human code review and every change will go through an automated system and that'll just sign off or not to give you feedback, then I think there would be a danger. Um, but for a few reasons. One is we're going to miss all those side effects of having multiple people looking at code in terms of knowledge transfer and expertise and that type of thing. But also because so much of what goes into code and the things that are cut in code view are like contextual and domain specific. So, I think Amazon has like an automatic code review bot, right? And that you can point it at your code and it will tell you where you have make a miss null check and things like that, right? But it may not know what design aesthetic you're looking for on your website. And so it's not going to say things like the color that you're using here is wrong, or the format of this medical records actually has been standardized according to this, government spec, and we're not following it. So we need to do that. And so that knowledge, I mean, the goal of code review is that if there's contextual knowledge, that's still in people's heads, and it's going to be really hard to codify that. So I don't think there's a danger. I think there is value in these things because these tools can find errors that humans might not find, or they can find like the really simple errors that humans see that they don't want to take the time to correct all over the place. So I think the way that I've seen it used in Microsoft, and there has been some effort to automate code reviews, is that people will send the code review first to the bot, and it will flag everything that it sees as an issue, and then send it to a human reviewer after the fact. That way, you get two levels of analysis going on, or of catching issues, but also the human can skip over all the kind of the low-hanging fruit that a bot would catch and then focus on the more critical kind of high level potential issues where it may not even be a bug in the sense that it would crash the system, but it's a bug in the sense that it's not following what the roadmap is or what the spec is. And those actually are the bigger issues anyways. They're harder to track down. They're usually caught later in the cycle. It's more costly to fix. So again, a long answer, but I think there's not really a danger unless people rely solely on automation. And then that is, yeah, that would be really bad. I haven't heard of any team that is planning to go down that road. Most teams want to add AI or ML in, but no one's using that to replace the human aspect. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question excellently. Thank you. Actually, last week we had a guest speaker who gave a very similar answer about this for how machine learning should be used. He said that machine learning's job is never to replace, it's to augment. It's to make us work faster, not replace us.
Yeah, so I would echo that 100%. So I'm mostly aware of the machine learning and AI that goes towards helping developers' lives. But I have seen time after time cases where people will endeavor to create a tool to replace a developer for some task. And inevitably, the bar that you have to hit, the ML system has to be so good because you can't allow mistakes. The bar is so high that you can't reach that goal. Whereas if I'm just trying to augment and help you, maybe surface some information you not be aware of, but ultimately the decision, the actions in the hands of the human, the bar's a lot lower, and it's easier to actually provide some benefit to people. So that what you're saying totally rings true to me, and I've seen that in many different parts of software engineering at Microsoft.
Okay,
Who was it? Can I ask what it was that said that?
Maybe Peggy can help me here. It was the speaker from Microsoft Research India.
Yeah, Chandra Madilla.
Oh yeah. Oh, you had him. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
And we've actually been working on a system that does. It's not related to code review, but yeah, where we're trying to give information to help a developer make decisions.
Yeah, and it's okay, Jonathan, you don't have to remember the name of all of the speakers, the authors that you're reading right now. It's great that
you I feel bad. I'm like, oh, okay, was that this name or that name?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm really impressed that you made that connection, right, to what he said. Thanks, Jonathan. I think we'll switch a little bit to just looking a little bit at the future of code reviews, maybe looking a little bit to the future and where it could go, and maybe some impact on work from home. And I'll invite Tyler to ask maybe the next question, if Tyler is there.
Yeah, I'm here. My question was mostly about sort of the changes that we've seen in the past few years, and especially this year. So with more teams working remotely and asynchronously, do you recommend, or have you sort of begun research in any new methods to sort of facilitate these code reviews and communication when it's not easy to be in person, or sometimes not easy to be synchronous?
Yeah, so I saw this question and it made me think. So I have like a half answer, because the best situation that we've seen is when people will literally sit at a computer similar to pair programming, and they're walking through, and the developer that wrote the code, or I'll say the author, is explaining what's going on, what he's thinking, and the changes he made, and then your reviewer asking a bunch of questions about it to make sure that they understand, right? That's the ideal. And clearly that only works if you're co-located and synchronous, right? So if you take out the co-located part, you can do screen sharing, and there are a lot of tools to enable pair programming remote that are being used today. That can help. If you take out the synchronous aspect, then it gets a bit more difficult, right? And you want code reviews to happen quickly. I haven't seen a lot of tooling. I'll tell you what I started a project to try to attack this. And the project was, we called it guided code reviews. So the idea was this: after watching a number of people do code reviews together, we noticed that one thing that happens often is the author will start out explaining their change, and then next comes the question. So I said, well, what if we had some code review tool where it literally recorded you, and you could like walk through the code, it would scroll, we even thought we could do eye tracking on this and show where you're looking. You could point it, and you could say, well, first I made this change here, and then I went there. And then when someone opened up a code review, they could actually get this recording of you, because no one wants to write down everything they did. That's like super annoying. But if I ask you to explain my change, most people will be happy to explain it in 2 or 3 minutes. So could we record that, make it available asynchronously to people? And really we didn't get too far past the initial pilot just because of resourcing issues. So that's one thing that could help. And also, one of the pieces of feedback that we got was that if you're in an open space, you don't want to be talking a whole lot. It gets awkward if you're explaining to a computer. Although somehow it's not awkward if you're talking to another person next to you. If you're talking to a recording, developers felt all kind of weird. So I actually have thought, well, now that everybody's working from home and they're in the room by themselves, maybe they'd feel less awkward recording a guided code review. But I haven't picked up that. So that's like my half answer, because we have evidence to think something like that could work, but I haven't put it into practice, got a pilot. Typically, a lot of problems show up when you pilot some tool and you're like, I totally should have seen this. It's totally obvious that there's be this issue, but you don't discover it till you actually build some prototype and then try it out. So that's why I think that's something to investigate, but I won't say that that's like a great answer yet, simply because I haven't tried it out.
Yeah, but great question and good discussion around that, Chris. I'm going to invite Cassie to ask a question a little bit related to our earlier discussion.
So my question is, you state in your paper, interestingly, modern IDEs ship with many tools to aid context and understanding. And there was an entire conference, ICPC, devoted to code comprehension, yet all current code review tools we know of show a highlighted diff of the changed files to a reviewer with no additional tool support. So I guess my question is, what would your ideal code review tool look like?
Okay. So that's a good question. So I'd have to think a little bit longer about like what would be the ideal, but let me share some things that we think could help and some of the things we actually put into practice. I should also say that things have gotten better since then. So this paper was written in 2013. No, it was published in 2013. It was actually written in the summer of 2012. So a long time ago. And the state of the world has gotten better since then. So we looked at if you just think to yourself, when you're writing code in an IDE, what are things that you use to help you kind of navigate and understand, right? Like if you open up a code base, actually today I had to start doing some work on a TypeScript compiler. And I was like, I opened it up in a text editor. And I was like, this is a disaster. I can't understand the code. I need to open up in an IDE. Right? So if you come into a piece of code, you're trying to work on it, trying to understand it, what do you do? Well, I often will click on some symbol and say like, find all references, right? Like where is this type used? Or I'll see a method call and I want to jump to the definition of that method call, right? And explore that as I'm moving around the call graph or the type system or something like that, right? I suspect many of you probably have done things like that where you don't use the references embedded within the code. And for that, you need some type of a program analysis to help you understand, or to give the IDE the facilities to help you jump around within the code. So that's the first thing. And we actually did put that into CodeFlow. It ends up being kind of tough if you can only see a few of the files in the program rather than the entire code base, because you can't do a full like semantic analysis like a compiler would. But if doing code review, you could say, hey, I see someone introduce this method. I want to jump to all the places where this method is called from, right? That would be useful. So that's one thing. Another thing that we saw that people do in IDEs is they try to find similar code. So if I see like 3 lines of code, I want to know, are there clones of those 3 lines in other places? And if so, I want to take a look at those and see what they're trying to accomplish. So we built some code clone analysis into CodeFlow so that if you saw a certain change that was made in a bunch of different places, it would automatically alert you to that fact. Trying to think of the other things. Oh, so another thing was tying to specs. So code, when you look through code at Microsoft, often you'll see things that like, this is related to work item 457, or the spec of this protocol is located here. So you see these like tags in these kind of structured comments. It's like, well, that's great, and it provides a pointer, but then you have to open up the work item database or find the SharePoint site that has the spec, wouldn't it be great if you had something that was automatically pull up those documents that are related to that change, so you could actually read the spec and then see if it fulfills it. Like, I'm sure there are more things. Another ideal thing was a code review tool that would automatically tell me who I should assign to the code review. Or would say, and I think someone did implement a plugin for this. If you were reviewing code and you knew the risk of different parts of the code. So if you had, for instance, if you were to color every line according to how often that line had caused a crash, for instance, or had caused a test to fail, then that could maybe direct you to the parts of the code review that are more important to review, especially in a code review where you have 20, 30, 50 files. You really can't go through those with a fine-tooth comb. So where should I direct my efforts? So there are probably other things, but those are some of things that would be great to be in a code review tool to help. And in some cases, some of those already are, they have the beginnings of.
Thank you. That was super interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about the code one with the number of crashes was really interesting. I was like, that's a really good point. Yeah. And that one was really good. And the finding similar code, but the crashes is smart because like,
yeah, we have
know where the risk is.
Risk is a big thing. I know another thing that actually that someone built was just knowing. So when there's a failure in Windows, we can tie that to the files that were involved in the failure by doing like a stack trace of the DLL and then saying, okay, well, what files are involved in that stack trace? So when you open up a code review, it'll actually tell you these are super risky files and these are like less risky files. I think it's like the standard red, yellow, and green kind of thing. And so if you only have green files, maybe you don't need to take as close a look as those reviews where you have a number of red high-risk files. People will spend more time on it. So risk is a big thing that people care about when they're shipping.
Great. Thanks, Chris. That was a great answer. A little bit related to that, Anthony had a question. I'm not sure if Anthony's there.
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. So as you discussed in your paper, code reviews provide many benefits to software development teams. So my question is, what are some of your suggestions for the development teams so that they can make their code reviews more efficient, less time consuming and more productive?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So I'll share some things that I have seen teams do. Make it more efficient. I mean, one thing about efficiency is if you have the right tool, it can make your job easier. And if you have tools that facilitate asynchronous review, that's going to help your life so that you don't have to try to make schedules align. So if there's a way to do that, which is why what we found in modern code review is part of it was it's tool based and you don't have to all get in the same room. So that's going to make things more efficient in terms of faster. There's also the notion of efficiency in terms of like the latency on a code review. That is, if I'm a developer and I want to check in my change to a code base, but let's say there's a team policy that my change has to be signed off by 2 people, then I can send it off, but then I'm waiting until those people complete that code review, and I can't really make progress, at least on that change. So for a while, when I started, code review was kind of this thing that I think one developer said it's kind of like flossing. You have to do it, and people don't really like doing it, but you just kind of have to do it because it's the right thing to do, and you'll pay the price later if you don't do it, but no one gets excited about it. It's not really rewarded, right? You don't really walk outside with a badge saying, I flossed today. So some teams have said, well, actually, we want to reward good behavior. And so they would like call out people that were doing their code reviews in less than 24 hours and say like, good job. Or there is the notion of, they're kind of, say metrics, but like target scorecards that developers try to hit. You try to make sure that you're making progress in a lot of different ways, and things are tracked like, are you getting so many tasks done per week and implementing so many features? And some teams decided to, and so that can impact like promotion rate and recognition and visibility. So people said, well, we should make code review a first-class citizen so that it's recognized if you're really good, if you're providing positive feedback, positive in the sense that it's helpful feedback, and you're accomplishing or completing your code reviews in a timely manner, we should make that more visible and reward people for that, rather than considering it something that just everybody has to do and slog through, but no one is really excited about, put some incentives behind it. And that, I know that in Bing, the goal is no review takes longer than 24 hours. And once they put a system like that in place where they were really rewarding it and recognizing people putting effort into it, they were able to hit, a lot more people were hitting that metric. So that's one aspect. Trying to think of other ways to make it more efficient. The only other thing that comes to mind is that a big problem is the size of code reviews. So if you imagine if someone gives you one file with like 5 lines changed to review it, you can probably review that fairly quickly. If you get a code review that has 100 files changed with thousands of lines within them, one of two things will happen. Either that will take you a very long time, or you'll do it in a decent amount of time, but you won't take a really close look at it. And so one of the things that we found is when teams focus on doing small, consistent, kind of atomic changes, people can review that way better, both in terms of the amount of time it takes and the quality. And when I say time it takes, I mean like that's in sum. So if I give you 2 10-line files or 2 10-line changes, you can review that in sum faster than one 20-line change because each piece is bite-sized and you have more in your head. So that we definitely saw had an impact on efficiency and quality.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. We have a lot more questions, but not a lot of time, but I'm going to try to squeeze a couple more in if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So Rohit, did you want to ask your question?
Yes. So my question was, how well do you think the code reviews are recorded to help knowledge transfer, considering that having more in-person communication reduces the electronic record?
Okay, so let me just restate what I think I heard. You asked me how well do I think the knowledge in code review is recorded to be used later for knowledge transfer. Is that capturing?
Yeah.
So I think that the knowledge, so I'll talk about what I see at Microsoft, but I think this is true for most tools where you have most tools operate on some type of thing where they'll show a code change and then someone can highlight some portion or region of the code and write some comment, maybe ask a question, and that can begin a thread of conversation. And so in that case, so we built a system where we were recording all of the comments and who made them and the timing on everything. And the data is all there. I think what's actually lacking in tooling is not so much recording data, but using that data effectively. So I talked to one team. So we built this tool, we called it CodeFlow Analytics, and it was gathering all this data and then putting it in a place where people could use it. And we spent some time talking to people that were actually using that data. And one team was actually looking at the code reviews and they had someone manually reading the comments for their team. And they used that to inform what their training that they had every month. Like if they saw an issue where people didn't understand maybe the Azure APIs around storage, they would say, okay, well, our training this month is going to be around Azure storage APIs. And so then they would check to see, are people asking the same questions, are having the same issues with that we see in code review. But that was unusual. For the most part, people cared more about things like metrics, just like how fast is this code review being completed. And that's not really knowledge transfer, right? I mean, it's using the data recorded in code reviews, but it's really just for metrics. I didn't see a whole ton of reviews or cases where people were using that for knowledge transfer. And I think that's kind of an untapped resource. When you think about code documentation, you're kind of writing for some audience that you don't know. And so you're trying to think, what are the questions that someone that reads my code might ask, and you're trying to answer them. But in a code review setting, people are actually asking you questions and you're providing concrete answers. So it seems really backwards that this conversation where you're trying to explain things to an interested party are not captured and surfaced around the code. It would be great if when I open a piece of code, I could see all the questions that people had asked about this code and see all the answers. Like that would be awesome. But there's no tooling for that. So the data's there. There's just no tools to support that. And I think that, there's a need there, but no one is filling it. It's definitely an untapped opportunity. So if you go to grad school and you're looking for a problem, I highly suggest that one. I think it should be done.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We are actually looking for ideas for projects for the course as well, and ideas for grad students. There's a lot of grad students in the class. So thanks for that suggestion. I think we'll try to squeeze just one more in. Thank you, Rohith. So Richard and Roshan, I'm going to maybe suggest that they ask their questions in succession, and then you can try to kind of weave them together. They're a little bit related to what we were talking about. Richard, can you jump in, and then Roshan, maybe ask your question?
Yeah, for sure. So in the paper, you quoted a manager saying basically that explaining your code to your peers drives a higher standard of coding, and that they thought that the process was actually more important than the result. With that in mind, like if code quality is the main goal, are there better approaches for that than code review?
And maybe Roshan, you want to ask yours, because I think they're kind of related.
Yeah, your paper talks about how code reviews have evolved through the way how people use them than they were originally intended for. So how effective do you think would code reviews be as a developer onboarding tool?
Okay, so those related. Let me answer the second one first, simply because I have a more clear answer for that. So there are some teams that use code review very much as an onboarding process. So when you join a team, you are put on like all the code reviews for some subset of some component of the system. You kind of can't learn a whole huge system at once, but if you're on some team that owns, I don't know, like the grammar checker in Word, for instance, right? It can be useful if you're included on the code reviews. It can ask questions, and there's kind of this notion that there's no question is too stupid to ask because you're a newbie and you're trying to understand the code base. So in that case, it provides a forum to see what's changing in the code and also help you to understand some of the architecture of the code. And also shows people some of like the culture of the team. So you can learn things like what are important coding conventions and protocols to follow, because you see the code initially before it is checked in, and then the things that people are asked to do to format their code or change naming or other kind of hygienic things. So people will learn that as well along the way. So I think it's actually really useful. And then there's a transition point where once the team feels like that you're mature enough, you're ready to actually start making changes, then they'll put the senior people as your code review kind of mentors. So whenever you have a change, you run it by one of the senior people on the team, and then they can continue to help you get better by kind of overseeing and giving you kind of positive suggestions or feedback about your changes. So I think it's pretty effective from onboarding. The first question was about, I think, are there even better methods of knowledge transfer than code review? So there are. So let me tell you one that I've seen. I saw one team where they would have every Thursday they called it a brown bag, and the idea was that at lunchtime you bring your lunch in a brown bag and you sit and someone gives like kind of an informal talk or lecture or something. And this was in Bing, I think, and basically every 2 weeks or so, someone would get up and kind of give a high level overview of some subsystem within Bing. And the idea was that over time, you're not going to get a really low level idea, but you'll have a sense of how things work together, what the assumptions are, what the common problems have been. Kind of like if you had to work on that part of the system, you'd at least know where to start. And sometimes that's the hardest thing, of just knowing where do I want to start from? Because once you know, like in a piece of code you're going to start, you can kind of begin getting your lay of the land. That was helpful, but there's the one thing that doesn't have going for it is the incentive problem. So when I have a code review, my goal, the code review is not the end, it's a means to an end, right? I want to get my change into production. And so my goal is to get that there, and the code review is a gate I have to pass on the process. So I'm really incentivized to have good code and to move that code review through quickly. And the reviewer he's incentivized to make sure that no bad code gets released. And so he's going to ask questions. So he's incentivized to ask the right questions. And I'm incentivized to give the right answers or to change my code accordingly. And the code review is just a means to that end. But during that process where we both have these incentives, that kind of drives this information flow and between us. And so it's kind of like, I view it kind of like the documentation thing. People don't really want to do it, but if it helps them, they will do it. And so this brown bag, it's only helpful for the people that go, and it's really not clear what the incentivization is for people. And so I think that kind of drives that behavior. I'm not sure if I'm being really clear in my answer, but I guess the short is yes, I've seen things, but I think code review has some things going for it in terms of information flow.
Great. Thank you, Chris. That was a great answer. Wow. I'm really glad we're recording this. You've got a lot of great insights that you're sharing here. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm glad it made sense.
Yeah. So we're at the end of the time, Chris. Thank you very much for your insights. I wanted to ask you a whole bunch of questions too, and actually the students had other questions that we didn't ask you, but if you want to look at them and maybe ask in the chat. I don't know, Chris, if you can stay around or maybe you have to go.
I've got to go in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I have 3:30, but I also would be happy to answer things over email or chat with people another time, or whatever.
Okay, that would be great. Maybe we could add you to our Slack channel if you want. You could have a look through.
Yeah, do. And I do want to just real quickly say, like, I did read through a lot of the questions, and I was really impressed by the kind of insightfulness of the questions that were being asked. When I go to academic conferences, typically there's this time where people can ask questions, and a lot of them are kind of like high level, not really deep thinking, but I could tell that a lot of like thinking and internalization went on in these questions, because they're really good, and a lot of them I hadn't even thought about. Is like, oh, that is a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. That's a great question. So you guys did a really good job both reading the paper but kind of thinking about how it applies, especially to like today's context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very impressive set of questions. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.